Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to something of an addendum recording set after Session 13. If you haven't already watched Session 13, go watch that because this is set right after the end of Session 13. And we've recorded this because we had some important character interactions that we wanted to get through before getting into Session 14 next week. So, without further ado, I should mention I'm joined by Snake.
Hi.
It was really quiet. And Nova.
Hello.
And, of course, myself, Polaris. So without further ado, Hyperion rested his back against the warehouse wall, trying not to let the sensation of disgust overtake him as he ingested the Ymir tree seed. That fight against the president had taken an unexpectedly high physical toll on him and had left him confused. Zelos had read the CAIN field manual front to back, practically memorized it, and with access to Ouroboros, he could always check again. He knew exactly what the stipulations around an Idelsin's severe attack were, and given the president's previous usage of the ability on Grace Harper, he knew that they had been fused because of the thoughts in his head, specifically. It was really fitting that all the knowledge Zelos had accrued still didn't help him rid himself of his weakness. If anything, it made it more apparent. Quite the turnaround in opinion you've had with Miss Harper in the last few months, noted Pathos. Most of that was clearing up that misconception about Grace Harper's principles a few months ago, and then perhaps further compounded by a sense of mutual acknowledgement from their regular visits to the gym. That still did not explain what had transpired, and what was still transpiring within him now. Why had Zelos rushed so frantically to form the prison to keep Grace Harper away from harm? Why had he, not Pathos, wilted slightly when Grace said she didn't trust him? Why had it mattered to him what anyone thought of him beyond his strength and his capability? Why was he so weak? Hyperion glanced at Grace Harper, with her cold, resolute expression. It was quite clear that she did not think of him anywhere near as fondly as apparently he did. That wasn't a problem. It wasn't. And yet, for all his steel veneer, Zelos' heart was still made of glass. Well fought. Your use of current proved crucial to neutralizing the sin. Knowing Grace Harper, perhaps she would just respond to this attempt at showing respect with another of her quips. Zelos felt compelled to say so anyway. His self-imposed quest for supremacy. He did not wish to deviate from it, but he just felt so alone.
Grace lied against the rubble of the warehouse, her expression empty as she stared into nothing. You did fine. Still didn't kill it. We failed. Again. Grace continued to stare into nothing. With an empty expression, her eyes were cold as ever, but a deep pain lurked within.
Hyperion stood up, walking over to Grace Harper. Zelos did not see that pain. Pathos did, however, and urged Zelos to do more. And Zelos obliged? I know. Damn it, I know. But there is nothing for us to do but keep moving forward. He offered a hand to her to get up, doubting she'd take it. Can't let ourselves get bogged down.
Grace did not take his hand.
Hyperion's outstretched hand balled up into a fist as it returned to his side. This was exactly why Zelos didn't involve himself in emotional matters. He had no care for it, no touch for it. Then improve. You pursue improvement in so many things, but not this? What would I gain from that? All that you deny yourself. And more. Zelos scoffed, as if. He moved to turn away, but hesitated. If he could understand Grace Harper, would he feel less alone? Hyperion sat down across from Grace, impassive, calculating eyes studying her, yet he found that he could not determine the equation to be solved. You seem in pain, beyond any physical injuries, that is. Pathos could not help but mentally transmit his disapproval at the inadequacy of Zelos' words. I admit a severe lack of tact, though if I was able to identify it, it must be rather serious.
Still no response.
After a moment, Zelos rolled his eyes. Like I said, you fool, this was a pointless endeavor from the start, Zelos said to Pathos, with no small amount of venom in his voice. Pathos said nothing. Unfortunately, it was difficult to disprove Zelos at the moment. Hyperion made no further attempts at conversation, silently staring into the middle distance.
Fate was a rather angry person, in all honesty. He'd often found that rage and spite were the two emotions that most commonly plagued his mind, perhaps unsurprising given his lot in life. His father was legendary for his unfathomable and destructive wrath, and he'd spent the majority of his life unable to do anything but live in fear and misery in the voided kingdom of Eden. Fear often accompanied anger. The Romans had seemed to figure out that much with the term phobia. Fate had lived in abject fear his entire life, and from the moment he'd been set free, he'd only thought of revenge. He, however, was not his father, and he most certainly wasn't Eden. His mother's kindness tended to win out in his heart in the never-ending struggle it and Fortitude's wrath were engaged in, and he'd been seemingly blessed from the moment he'd left Eden with kindness all around him. The literal virtue of temperance had been there for him to guide him through his anger and how best to deal with it. Fate knew there was no point in letting it consume him. Not now, anyway. He'd been angry with his inability. He was unable to save his parents when Under Heaven shot down Seraph. He should have killed Isamu when he had the chance, yet he was unable to push past Willow's directive. He had been unable to save Will for the same reason, and now only God above knew where he was, if he was even alive. Instead of letting such things crush him, though, Fate instead took a deep breath and pushed past the things that were out of his control. The only thing to focus on was the future, and ensuring he could minimize any future regrets. Let your anger give way to hope. A hope that you can make things better tomorrow. Asher, the virtue of temperance, had once told him. Tomorrow was here, Fate supposed. As he composed himself and set his anger to the side, he looked to a conversation happening in the warehouse and the slight moment of recuperation the group would now have. Hyperion spoke to a despondent Grace, and his words did not seem to penetrate whatever mental walls she'd placed up. He'd understood it, of course. While he had no regret in telling the cadre the truth about their situations, he did wish there had been time for him to speak to them, to help them decompress from information as heavy in both scope and magnitude as what he dropped on them. He imagined Grace and Mia, in particular, would be hurt. Eden had lied to and sought to abuse them, and they had to find out from a fellow victim. It couldn't have been easy. Grace looked like she needed a bit of time, however. Her despondency hadn't actually been the thing that had caught his attention in the conversation the two dark-haired cadre members were having. Rather, it was the other party, Hyperion, that had made him take particular notice. Was he trying to comfort her? He could have sworn he'd heard the words, beyond any physical injuries, that is. Such a statement, especially in the current situation the group now found themselves, went beyond the cold and calculating pragmatism he'd expected from Zelos. Yet the slightly awkward tone he spoke with, that which sounded like empathy or some form of higher, groundbreaking physics humanity had only just started to understand, couldn't have been pathos. While he did not know their third well, something in his gut told Faith this wasn't him either, No, this was surely the same man who typically had control of the vessel whose aggregate was Hyperion. It was Zelos, trying to actually have a conversation with someone and maybe, just maybe, try to help them. A small smile broke out on his face. He'd been right, perhaps. Hyperion was far more than the sum of his parts. Thinking about it now, Grace and Hyperion's fusion had also been odd, hadn't it? The President was clearly no mere idle son anymore, but that ability was a textbook idle severe attack, the parameters of which targeted the affected and that which they desired most, or who they desired most. Considering the attack had struck Hyperion, Fate could start to put some of the pieces together, and his grin only grew. Clearly he'd missed something while he'd been away, and it seemed to be something positive. He almost felt bad about tearing them apart. Almost. He still wasn't sure how Grace felt about Hyperion, and if the feelings from Hyperion's end were even truly what Fate had suspected. Either way, it was still a funny thought. As their conversation died down and Grace met Hyperion's words with nothing but silence, Fate took the moment to perhaps save his socially inept ally from the other. He exited the warehouse, hopping easily onto the roof and looking out over the city. Manhattan was already starting to be reduced to ruins. He hated the sight. Everything inside him screamed to run and help Marcel, or to look for Will, but he then thought of the rest of his cadre. What if they were attacked when he wasn't there? Oh, Fate needed to trust in Beauty and V3 to win their battles, wherever they were. They could handle themselves. They were strong, after all. Instead, Fate hopped down, still outside the warehouse, and called out to Hyperion. Yo, Zeal, you got a sec? Think we gotta talk strategy. Things are getting ridiculous out here. He hoped the topic of strategy would bring him out of any stupor Hyperion found himself in, and at least give him something of a distraction. There was far more than strategy they needed to speak of, however.
Zeal. Despite that being the translation of Zelos' self-bestowed title, he had never been called that at any point. He supposed it wasn't bad, and frankly, he was happy to have something to do other than stew in his frustration at his attempt and failure to get through to Grace Harper. He got up from his seat in the warehouse. When Fate had first made his intentions clear, he had been struck with a mixture of fear and hatred. Fear that all of Zelos' subtle progress towards success would be wiped out by Fate's tell-all. Hatred that yet more information had been kept from him by Eden that was now going to make things more difficult for him. But it seemed that, despite the newcomer's incredibly dogmatic views, most of which ran antithetical to Zelos' own, Fate appeared to have a pragmatic streak, which he appreciated. Oddly enough, Pathos and Mesos concurred in their neutral to positive assessments of Fate. Pathos because, of course, he was pained by Fate's past. Mesos because his all-encompassing fury towards Eden made it so that any enemy of Eden could be an ally, or tool, of Mesos. Hyperion exited the warehouse, sparing a glance to the hellscape that was Manhattan, before coming face to face to neck, with Fate. That new height was going to take some getting used to. I agree. We need to put together a plan, especially considering things will likely only get more difficult for us. What do you have in mind?
Fate looked out to the city once more before looking to Hyperion. For starters, the situation's rather bleak. We're down 2 members, if you could count Isamu as one. And VG6 is spread thin. CAIN's likely scrambling other cadres from around the world right now, but it's almost certain that we're the strongest group in the eastern US. Much as I'd like that to be a boast, it's more of a worry. VG6 has Caitlin, so they can be called in anywhere, so they don't really count. And they're already here now, and things are still looking grim. Justice could be anywhere from Beijing to Amsterdam right now, and Seraph down. The thought gives him pause, though he continues all the same. The implication that he knew of the lie ignorance had been told regarding justice was lost in Fate's contemplation. While it'd be nice, we shouldn't expect any reinforcements. We're likely on our own for a while. I hope it's not the case, but we need to operate under the assumption that Will can't join us either for now. That leaves us 5 as the last defense against Behemoth's seal. We can't leave the other external problems of Under Heaven and Isamu to VG6 for the time being. And we just need to head straight to the seal. It should be in the subway. Unless we come across something of importance, we gotta keep moving. If they're still up, we'll have to deal with Yamamoto afterwards. Which is why I'm asking for a bit of help. It's taking all I got not to try and save people right now or jump in and go fight Isamu. I need a bit of pragmatism to sort of balance me out, I think. I'll want to go off and save people, and I still might where I can, but I need someone to bring me down to reality, to the moment, you know, if I'm going too far. I think I can count on you for that, and hopefully vice versa. If there's someone we can save, then we will. You know, you balance out my heroism thing with pragmatism, and I do the opposite for you, yeah? It was rather hard for Fate to admit that particular fault of his, but it was something that needed to be put out to Hyperion specifically. There was a good chance that if Fate went off to save someone or do something heroic, the others might be inclined to go off with him or agree. He knew he could count on Hyperion to think practically, though, and that he'd been likely to keep Hyperion from thinking too practically when it came to innocent lives. He'd listened to his response. He knew that regardless of his answer, there was almost certainly no changing Hyperion's views on the matter.
Hyperion listened to Fate's situational assessment carefully and found himself to be pleasantly surprised at the newcomer's amicable outlook towards dissenting opinions. Not that Eden was ever particularly adamant about his ways, but he had always carried an air of expectation that his way would be the accepted way. Zelos could not deny that Fate's outlook was comparatively refreshing. Plus, it also gave Zelos an opportunity to understand fully how Fate operated. Minimization of human casualties was his primary goal. Zelos' expression of his interests could be tailored accordingly. If CAIN's asset assessment is as dire as you indicate, which appears to be accurate for the time being, and the minimization of civilian casualties and collateral damage is our primary goal, then I agree that locating and defending the seal on Behemoth is to be our primary task. We can only speculate on Under Heaven's motivations within unsealing a primeval sin, but it will lead to significantly higher damage and loss of life than anything else currently in the field. Hyperion gazed out towards the cityscape. It was convenient for Zelos that keeping Behemoth sealed was the morally good course of action. It would appeal to Fate. Isamu is currently killing thousands, I imagine, but if Behemoth gets out, it will likely kill millions. Therefore, neglecting above-ground chaos and heading into the subway system is the most logical course of action.
Though he wished he weren't, Fate knew Hyperion was right. Behemoth posed a far greater threat than Isamu or the Under Heaven operatives did. Saving the potential many outweighed the currently suffering relative few. The cadre only had one goal ahead of them then. Yeah, you're right. Alright, dead set focus on protecting the seal. Don't plan on deviating from that. Well, in any case, strategy aside, there's a matter of tactics. Things have changed a bit since Eden, and we probably should make a more formal declaration of how to move forward. We can come up with something more concrete later, but for now, I think it should break down something like this. You're the main center of our plans this time. You and Ian are the main spearhead, and I'll be your shield. Grace and Jake are our supports, with Mia playing the versatile role. She can support or hit hard when it comes down to it. I take point to defend you, Ian, and or Grace, then let Grace and Jake set you up in whatever supportive positions that they deem necessary. Mia takes whatever relevant action she thinks is right, and we finish out with you crushing whatever we're up against. If Will does end up joining us, he's on damage duty with you. Main thing, I act first to protect you, since I should be fast enough to avoid reprisal, then you call if you need support from Grace or Jake. Fate planned to listen to Hyperion's input, unlikely to disagree with any modifications or objections the man would have with the idea. While Fate had plenty of confidence in his own strategic capabilities, Hyperion was the only person he'd ever known and been able to see in all of Eden's memories who could outmatch him, possibly even best him. It was the knowledge and planning of the greatest mind in history and the greatest mind of today. Unlike Eden, though, Fate was far more flexible in taking criticism. Fate would almost certainly go with whatever ideas Hyperion had in mind. They could draw up plans to confirm with the rest of the group.
Eden's loss in combat situations was felt in the loss of clarity he provided in an otherwise chaotic fight. Fate, however, had proven himself to be a powerful defensive bulwark in their rematch against the President. Loss in one place, gain in another. I largely agree with the role assessments you suggest, with a few modifications. One, some modified form of the old Bastion attack plan may be useful to keep around, as Sins do have a penchant for powerful, slow attacks. I can momentarily expand Ian to Cat 4 size, which should reasonably grant protection to every cadre member. If for whatever reason there is a cadre member or other important asset that Ian would not be able to envelop, I would then say you can play the defensive role for that individual or asset. Aside from that edge case, myself with Ian or the Lich King on the offensive, plus V3 if he is able to return, makes sense. Mia in the versatile role is reasonable, as is Jake in the support role, and yourself in the defensive role. Though I would suggest you include Mia in your defensive rotation at your discretion, as the close-range nature of her fighting style makes her liable to taking significant damage, to the point of falling unconscious in our last two major Sin fights. Before continuing on, Hyperion appeared to bite his lip. He had conspicuously not mentioned Grace Harper in terms of tactics as of yet, but Zelos pushed his uneasiness aside. Now was not the time for this behavior. Finally, Grace Harper should likely also play a versatile role, but at long range. She has the capacity to either provide our attacks advantage or significantly damage Sins or Exorcists in her own right. And Hyperion seems to shake his head to refocus. I trust her judgment on how to utilize her own skill set.
Fate listens to Hyperion talk and finds himself to be in concurrence with the other. Having another shield in the form of Ian, as well as moving to protect Mia, would all be rather good. If he could find no fault in the point, or he could find no fault in the point of this agreement as expected, and just gave a nod and a sound of confirmation. When Grace was mentioned, there was a slight eyebrow raise at the hesitation Hyperion presented. There was a thought in Fate's mind to prod further into the anomaly, hoping to get more insight into his suspicions that Hyperion felt more for Miss Harper than he outwardly let show. The sounds of fire and explosions in the distance pulled him out of his more whimsical line of thought, though. It was a sobering reminder that this was no place for such a frivolous question, especially one that may actually anger Hyperion more than just embarrass him. Fate looked at the chaos of the city once again, his face slightly malformed from disgust. People like him make me sick. Confuse power with strength, and the innocent and the weak get hurt. They had a bad life, so they just took it out on everyone around them. His gaze is fixed on the palace battle occurring between Isamu and Beauty. People like him or Oro think they're strong just because they can use others below them. Look at what it's gone. How many people are dead just because one guy couldn't get their ego in check? They've had their entire lives upended because some frick felt scared and inadequate. His gaze shifted back to Hyperion. There's a serious look on his face, but the anger had mostly vanished. I heard the conversations you and Isamu had when you were with Oro. I'm not here to pass judgment or corner you or anything. Part of why I never brought it up, all the Empire stuff with the group. Not even really trying to tell you not to pick up the crown if we ever got the chance. Probably don't need to tell you that you and I would be at odds if it comes to that. He looks at the city once more. The haunting screams of misery from children and adults alike echoed in the distance as explosions rang out. If they accompanied Fate's next question. Zeal. He is specifically talking to Zelos here. He had respect for the separation of personalities that Hyperion had and would address them as their own individuals unless told otherwise. Besides, this conversation certainly wasn't for the other two. I gotta ask, if it took that or more to get your empire, would you still go for it? It's one thing to think about these things or to have dreams of grandeur, but now you've seen just some of what it looked like to build your kingdom. Seen the pain and misery that it caused someone, that you cause on people when you try to achieve your dream by forcing it on others. Once more he looked to Hyperion, this time no longer changing his glance back to Manhattan. Not saying I think you're Isamu. Not at all. I think you're better than that. Stronger than some snot-nosed psycho who's just mad at everything. I think you were hurt, and it may have made some sense to hurt others then. But I don't think you really want that. I think you just don't want to feel powerless after someone took everything away from you. Given what Hyperion knew of Fate, it was his hope that he might see that Fate understood Hyperion's rage likely better than anyone else in the world ever could. Fate's head gives a slight tilt to the warehouse where Grace, Mia, and Jake were currently resting. You think you could murder them like Isamu did? All of those people just to get your empire? I don't see Grace or Mia going along with it. Jake certainly wouldn't want a world where his mom's a slave. Do you think you're strong enough to protect them instead? Subjugate your enemies? Did you protect your friends?
Zelos knew this conversation was coming. Truth be told, his outlook on his future empire had changed significantly since that conversation with Isamu prior to the third hunt. Zelos' later conversation with Ouroboros, where he had been blessedly separated from Misos' ire, along with the segmenting influence Ouroboros seemed to be providing in his own mind, it had become possible to envision an empire where Zelos could alter the world out of its current hellish state, without mass murder. I am of the fundamental belief that this world, in its current state, is hell, and one way or another, its nature must be changed. In previous conversations that you may have seen from me, my outlook on how my empire would be achieved was poisoned, tainted by Misos' unbridled hatred. Lately, I have been able to think more independently from the hatred of the centipede, and I believe it possible to achieve my dominion while demonstrably improving the world itself. Hyperion looked out towards Manhattan, his expression impassive, though slightly disapproving. I have no interest in leveling entire cities in the name of empire, nor do I ascribe to any sort of racist, exorcist-first ideology as you seemed to imply when we first met. No, my placement of exorcists above humans stems entirely from the combat capabilities of the former being significantly higher than the latter, therefore posing the greatest opposition to my ascent. Collateral damage and human casualties will be minimized. The deaths of those millions would not bring me any closer to my goals anyway. Hyperion turned back towards Fate. When Zelos was in control of this vessel, he had a habit of leveling a gaze that seemed to bore through people, Fate included, with its intensity. As for whether the cadre would oppose me, I sincerely believe they would not. I would appreciate their assistance even, should I receive it. My vision would be a net positive to all life in this world. I know a few things about what a utopia looks like, as you may recall, so I believe I'd be significantly more qualified than most in achieving such a reality. And also, they are not my... Hyperion suddenly stumbled, as though shocked by the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He quickly recovered. Perhaps you will call it ego to believe that I can achieve this change. I simply believe it to be a combination of confidence, knowledge, and drive. It was a great sterilization of Hyperion's previously mentioned plans for Empire. It was also a lie, but Zelos didn't know that. Mesos chuckled to himself from within Hyperion's subconsciousness.
If you intend to achieve empire through my power, you will find that your plans will need significant alterations to meet my demands.
Fate didn't know what he'd expected to hear from Hyperion, but it certainly wasn't that. Unexpected, but not unwelcome. Fate had never considered the possibility of a lie to escape Hyperion's lips, conscious or otherwise, and this time was no different. He took the other's words more or less at face value. Well, it's certainly a step up from killing most people and enslaving the rest. Guess you've gone through some character development. A genuine smile flashes on Fate's lips. He knew that Oro wanted something similar, though he hoped that Hyperion had come to this more positive outlook without the devil's whispers. He had an immense amount of faith in Hyperion over that monster. Not a big fan of the Emperor stuff still, but I can certainly get behind a better world for everyone. I don't know what this, I don't know that everything in this world is hell. Something I could consider hell. Not for me. Not after what Eden put me through. But then again, I think hell's kind of subjective for everyone, right? The worst thing that someone can imagine is hardly the same across the board. Hyperion's penetrating gaze didn't bother Fate in the same way it vexed Eden. Fate had nothing to hide, and found Hyperion's slightly odd behavior sort of amusing in a way. His peculiar mannerisms had a certain charm to them. Fate raised an eyebrow with a slightly smug look as he nearly denounced the idea of the cadre being his friends. He'd yet to say anything on the matter, and let him finish his thought. However, while he may have escaped further questioning on Grace earlier, Fate wasn't about to let this opportunity slip through his hands as well. Confidence, knowledge, and drive. Heck, earlier I thought I was immune to mind reading. Yet you picked the 3 exact words I described you to Kate. Describe you as to Kate. You know, just like as descriptors, like confident, knowledgeable, driven, whatever, you get the point. Fate's smug expression returned. But for someone so confident, that quality seemed to be lacking in 2 regards. A rare thing for Mr. Zealous himself. You certainly wouldn't want to call the cadre your friends, right? I mean, I wasn't there, but I know Eden planned you a birthday party. Doubt they bailed on you. Could just be me, but I don't attend birthday parties with people I dislike.
Zelos grit his teeth. Not this matter again. He had done what he could to put the whole matter behind him. How close he had come to breaking, to collapsing into squalor. Zelos pushed the memories away. He opened his mouth to dispute Fate, to tell him that they had all arrived due to Eden's machinations, that their opinion of him hardly factored into their decisions to attend that party, and that furthermore, their opinions were of no consequence to...
Was Miss Harper there? The question was asked with an ever slight but unmistakably devious nature to it. But Miss Harper dragged on just a bit too long for the implication that she might matter more to Hyperion, being rather difficult to miss.
Ugh, damn it all, but that elicited more of a response out of him than it should have. He knew that Fate had seen and would continue to exploit that moment of shock that had appeared on his face at the mention of Grace Harper. Why? Why? Why would Pathos choose now to afflict him with this, whatever this was? I didn't do anything, Pathos corrected from the deep. Impossible. And yet, there really was no use in denying it when the Idle Sin's severe attack had laid it all bare. His weakness. Hyperion struggled to collect himself, Fate's words having clearly struck a chord with the would-be Emperor. Hyperion grit his teeth. Yes, there was a birthday party, and yes, Grace Harper did indeed attend. Though, as I'm sure you bore witness to, the cadre's attendance had more to do with Eden's schemes than any will, positive or negative, they feel towards me. Zelos' thoughts flickered back to Grace Harper's attire and appearance during that farce. Makeup and floral perfume. Not for him, as she'd said. Of course, he had not expected it, and he did not wish for it. It did not bother him. It didn't. Hyperion leveled a glare at Fate, not one of true anger, but frustration. Frustration at himself for his weakness being exposed. What exactly are you getting at? Do you intend to insinuate that I feel some inordinate amount of care towards Grace Harper? I value her as a member of this cadre. I value her skill and resolve. And before you get any ideas, the likely reason she was pulled into the severe attack the President leveled at me was because...
It took all Fate had not to display the largest and silliest of grins. There was something fun, he thought, seeing Hyperion, specifically Zelos, engaging in behavior that might resemble opening up. Not much, Fate understood. The doorway was still most certainly closed. Yet, here he was, discussing his feelings with others. The same man whom he'd heard speak of empire and tyranny not but a month ago was stammering his way through his feelings, regardless of their nature, for a teammate. Once again, Fate couldn't help but see the humanity in the man. It could be easy to forget amidst the battles, the intrigue, and the general turmoil that accompanied their lives that Hyperion was just a person, that they were all just people. The scene gave him even more hope. Uh-huh, Fate added as Hyperion paused to think of a reason why he'd been fused with Grace. Because?
Hyperion appeared paralyzed. Because what? What was the reason why? You know why, Pathos needled. Because I desired her trust. Damn it all, he wanted her to trust him. He wanted to be worthy of her trust. It confused him. It saddened him that she did not appear to, even though he had never lied to her, even though he had never planned to manipulate her like a chess piece on a board. He had simply wanted to make an ally of her, and yet he had seen the betrayal in her eyes when Fate aired out the truth about his personas. That had hurt him in a way he had not expected. And now he did not know what to do about it.
Fate's smile dropped a bit, not to the point of a frown, blank expression, but rather just smaller, perhaps more serious smile and teasing smirk. I see. For trust, huh? Fate glanced back at the warehouse once more when he spoke. Well, if that conversation you two had were a chess match, I think she had your butt in check on move 3. Or mate, really. It was just a tiny bit one-sided. Words were maybe a little harsh, but sure to grab his attention, Fate reckoned. But it wasn't a game of chess to you, right? I mean, the conversation. You weren't trying to use her or worm your way into her heart when she's sort of vulnerable right now, right? You can see it in your eyes. And correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but it's not just her trust as an asset you care about. A little more than her ever-present reliability that caused you two to merge, yeah? His eyes turn up to the night sky as he thinks for a bit. It's kind of a messy feeling, right? To go from an environment where you always gotta be thinking 2 steps ahead because everyone else is trying to move you around like a piece on the board. Suddenly finding yourself in a group of people that aren't trying to use you. It's sort of all you've ever known, but now you're feeling something different. Again, stop me if I'm spitting a bunch of nonsense, but you want her to trust you, not your plans, not your schemes or ideals of empire, though I'm sure that'd be a nice bonus. You want her to trust who you are, to know that you're not just a liar and a user, to know you'll have her back when it really counts, yeah? His starry eyes glint with the reflection of the stars above, and they turn back down to Hyperion. You know, when you care about someone, want them to feel better, want to trust them, and want them to be able to reciprocate, that sounds a whole lot like a friend to me. Or at least someone you'd like to be your friend.
Hyperion appeared to stare into the middle distance, pondering fate's words. Friend. A person whom one knows and with whom one has a bond of mutual affection. Such was the dictionary definition of the word, and by the criteria established in it, Hyperion did not have friends. Friends were not ever meant to be something Hyperion ever had or would ever have. Did Zelos want friends? The idea of having one, of sharing himself with another, and them doing the same. He derided it as a needless distraction. He feared it, as someone as close as a friend would be, would see him for who he really was. The shadow of himself that he dared not gaze upon. The wretch of yesterday laid bare for that person to see. And yet he desired it. Goodness, he desired it more than he had ever realized. He couldn't deny it anymore. This wasn't Pathos' doing in any way. He, Zelos, wanted a friend. He, the would-be conqueror of creation, desired connection, real connection, not the unspoken contracts he had with Dr. Atomsphere or Ouroboros. Zelos wanted someone to look at him and tell him he wasn't a wretch, tell him he was worth something beyond his strength and capability. Zelos wanted someone to care for him without conditions. Zelos wanted someone to understand him, to understand his pain. Zelos wanted someone, anyone, to show him love, love like he had never known in this world. And for whatever reason, perhaps due to her outward similarities in disposition, her inner resolve, or maybe what he had glimpsed of her past all those months ago, as she derided herself and derided her identity, Zelos had been looking for that connection in Grace Harper, because he felt she could understand him. Yes, Hyperion responded softly, in a voice more tender than anything fate or anyone alive had ever heard from Hyperion out loud. I do wish for a friend. Hyperion closed his eyes, clearly stifling tears. How pathetic. After everything he had sacrificed and bled for to get to this point, now he was talking like he wanted to throw it all away. He couldn't let himself stray any further, lest he cut his quest short, dooming himself to failure forevermore. His path was the ascension. That was all that was his. He held no claim over any other path, lateral or declining. Hyperion blinked the wetness from his eyes, his exterior becoming the texture of granite. But that is not for me, he said, with a finality, moving to slam the door shut once again.
There it was, Fate saw. There was Hyperion. This wasn't Zelos or Pathos or Mesos, or rather, it certainly wasn't just them at that moment. Hyperion's genuine sorrow was something that likely penetrated far beyond the bastions that were built around his personality, and instead hit him right at the core of the person who was Hyperion. The reason Hyperion's emotional turmoil, Gander, and the intensity of Zelos' drive, Mesos' misery, and Pathos' love are all laid bare in a single tear. Loneliness can break anyone in a myriad of ways, and indeed, Though all their responses may have differed, it seemed this fact remained true for the three facets of Hyperion. At the very least for Zelos, it would seem. Fate's smile did not fade, but his expression did soften each time Hyperion spoke. It wasn't pity, like the look one gives when seeing a diseased or dying animal, but rather compassion. Fate's green eyes held nothing but empathy for the man before him. Friends might not be for you, but loneliness isn't for anyone. Not really. He could see Hyperion moving to slam the door to the outside world that was daring to get too close to bursting in. It'd been the same reservation Oro and Draconim had forced onto ignorance whenever he thought of opening up to someone, though he doubted Hyperion's closure was anything but self-inflicted. Fortunately, Fate had something of a talent for tearing down doors that were placed in front of him. He did not wish to forcibly expose Hyperion to the outside world or drag him from the depths of his own misery. Rather, he sought to tear down the door to his mental bunker and let the illusion of safety that solitude provided vanish. Hyperion may stay inside himself, but the perhaps uncomfortable reality that people cared for him would always be visible. There's safety in isolation, and also torment. Whoever is delighted in solitude is either a wild beast or a god. You might think parts of yourself to be either, but I've seen what both are like. I've lived amongst the genuine article for over a decade, and I can tell you two things. One, they aren't so different, beasts and gods. They're both creatures that don't care for others, since the world, whether through ignorance or omnipotence, it's lost all human meaning. The second, you aren't one of them. You're a person, and a damn good one at that. He mentally cursed himself for the swear outside of a combat situation, but continue. You might think you can go it alone, or that maybe you don't deserve it, but none of that's true. Till you've proven that your humanity truly means nothing to you, till you've gone over that edge like Kisama did. You deserve love, man. Turn to Hyperion fully. More than that, you just don't deserve to be lonely. In heaven or hell, no one should ever really be alone till they've proven otherwise. Not saying I know you front to back like a book or anything, but I have been in your head for a bit. I'm not going to pretend I agree with everything you do, but I do think I understand you. The real you, at least a little bit. You saw the way I was ready to just kill a horrible person like Isamu. I'd like to think I got a pretty good read on people in general, after having seen a millennia of human suffering through Eden's memories. And you, Zeal, Fate's smile grew into a larger, though still genuine grin. Or someone I'd consider my friend. Someone who I know and can trust, and hope can do the same for me. I mean, may not be the dictionary definition, but we're just subjective anyway. Everyone's got to have different criteria for friendship, probably. All the same, you're someone I'd be honored to call my friend.
Hyperion felt Fate's words wash over him. He said nothing. He didn't know what he could say, how he could express his pain. Whosoever is delighted in solitude is either a wild beast or a god. So saith Aristotle. Hyperion knew Fate's quote well, and he did indeed in the past identify with one or both of these poles. But now he knew the truth. He didn't delight in solitude. He desperately wanted to be free of this loneliness. But as Fate continued, Hyperion knew why he couldn't escape. Fate claimed to have understood him. If he really did, Fate would have been disgusted by what he had found. And seeing Fate's true and genuine smile as he declared himself to be Hyperion's friend, Hyperion knew that Fate did not understand. Hyperion heard and comprehended all of Fate's words, but simply did not respond before walking away. Not back into the warehouse or towards the city, simply away. Away from all contact. Hyperion couldn't deny his desire for companionship, but he could, and would, withhold himself from attaining it. He didn't deserve it. He never would.
A short while after his conversation with Hyperion, Fate made his way over to Grace. He'd been thinking long before he'd left Beauty's palace on how this conversation might go. Of everyone, aside from Mia, Grace had been the one he'd been the most worried about having Eden's truth revealed to. Grace didn't have many, or to Fate's knowledge, any, friends aside from Eden, and he'd been using her. He knew that no matter what, this conversation would be difficult, if not impossible. It likely didn't help that Eden had worn Fate's face for all the time she'd known him. While he looked different, similarities were hard to miss. "Yo, Grace!" he called out to the dark-haired woman. His loud and boisterous nature, in combination with his tone, sounded different than anything Eden had ever produced, yet it was still his voice. You got a sec? Use your help to survey some damage and potential future route. Use your keen eye, and that rifle scope wouldn't hurt. If you're up for it, I'll be up on the roof. All good if not, of course. None of this was a lie. They did need to get a proper assessment of the situation around them and start plotting a route before they'd get their orders. It was, however, also a pretext for a more intimate conversation. Fate knew what it was like to be used by Eden, and regardless of the degree, Grace would sadly also now count itself amongst its victims, count herself. If anyone was in a position to start walking her through some of it, he figured he may as well get to go. Fate put the ball in her court to approach him, something that he thought was for the best. Making it her decision could leave further initiation to her, give her control and agency, the same thing Eden had so often deprived her of. These were Fate's current goals. And so, he would do as he said, easily hopping onto the roof once again, his cloak and hair gently blowing in the wind. The city's destruction had only grown worse since his conversation with Hyperion. What better view for victims of the devil than gazing upon hell?
Grace sat alone among the rubble of the warehouse, silently processing the information that she'd been given an hour prior. She'd hoped she could ignore how she felt by closing herself off and focusing on the mission. But the rematch with the president had only made things worse. She'd been injured badly, and worst of all, conjoined instead in a disgusting union with Hyperion. A reminder of how easily a sin could alter the appearance of a person, removing bits of their humanity, the abhorrent sin they added. Grace thought of her body as the last semblance of her humanity. For a long time, her mind and soul had been corrupted over time by murder, and even more recently, further exposure to the psyche. It's why she keeps her body in such pristine condition, ensuring that she could remain as human as she could in appearance. Plus, looking good didn't feel bad either. But, as her hand twisted and her body joined with another, she couldn't help but feel dirty. And to make matters worse, the meaning behind that vile united form was clear as day to her. Hyperion desired her, desired to use her, just as Eden had. She wouldn't let him feign care as Eden did. She wouldn't let the words of another dictate her feelings. She couldn't let anyone get close to her like that again. Clearly, getting to know someone else is far more trouble than it's worth. After all, this was her fault. It was idiotic for her to develop romantic feelings for someone she barely knew. She was just a stupid little girl wishing for a boyfriend, thinking a man would be the answer to her loneliness. She couldn't bear to feel that again. And that betrayal, the feeling she still harbored for him, why won't they just go away? There's still one thing she's learned over the years. It's that feeling. Feelings were difficult to navigate. But she never thought it could get to this point. Yo, Grace. Fate had said that. Sounded like Eden. Grace cursed herself for the momentary sliver of excitement she felt from hearing that voice. She could only bear entertaining the thought due to the quick burst of rage that followed. But she knows it's not him. Grace didn't respond initially to Fate. Frankly, she didn't want to interact with anyone, especially not a man who looks and talks like the guy she learned wanted to kill her. And as much as she hated to admit it to herself, it broke her heart. However, he was right. We needed to survey the area before we move. Otherwise, we'd only increase our chances of death. Grace inhaled and got up, straightening her posture and wearing her normally cold and different expression. Unaware her eyes held deep pain. Her parents, as neglectful as they were, still often told her eyes had a special look to them whenever she was upset. You could see behind the natural frost of their beautiful gray and see the emotion within. Grace made her way to the rooftop. The light breeze of the wind was enough to move her hair more from her eyes. More over her eyes. A good way to block Fate from seeing deeper into them. Or so she'd hoped, at least. As she reached the top, she took a moment to look at the city. Could she be partially responsible for this? What if there were more virtues on standby? Could more be saved? Would this already be over? No. Caitlin told her why they did this. What sacrifice had to be made in the effort of making things better for her, for everyone. Grace steeled her face further and spoke in her usual tone towards authority. I'm here. Fate, what do you need from me?
Fate gave a small smile as Grace made her way to the roof. Though her demeanor was almost certainly anything but positive, the fact that she'd bothered to come up at all was something of a little miracle, he reckoned, and one to be appreciated. Glad you could join me. Situation's dire. Apparently, I'm trying to get a read on our next move and path forward. You and Hyperion are some of the smartest and most analytical people I know. I already got his perspective on things. Would have gone to you first, but it seemed like you were still catching yourself up after the fight. Given her an easy out for her reserved and withdrawn attitude if she wished to take it. Fate, of course, knew it was far more than injuries that had kept Grace quiet and upset, but there'd be time for that conversation soon enough. So, I wanted to get your view. City's burning, under heaven's going rabid, but we did get the prize locked down, at least for now. Street might be crawling with all sorts of traces and sins, though, still. Mention Isomu. His gaze shifts towards the city once again, an anger that had never seemed to find itself on Eden's face before contorting Fate's visage. A deep-set scowl and burning eyes set forward on the blaze Isomu had caused. I should have killed him when I had the chance. All those people. I mean, believe in beauty to win, but that monster's just gonna kill more people. I should be over there. Catches himself, returning to the moment with grace. Sorry. His face turns softer as he turns away from the violence of Manhattan and back to her. He moves to sit down on the roof so that his back is facing away from the carnage, so that his eyes are set solely on Grace. I know why I needed you up here. Can't look at the city without wanting to jump in and do something. What you don't gotta tell me is a bad idea. Zeal, the hype. He already talked to me. It's, not good. I know we gotta stick together. I was wondering if you had any ideas on how to move forward. Battle plans, tactics, strats, just general thoughts along the lines of we're screwed, we'll honestly do. His gaze turns towards the stars now, his brow furrowing once again. Cowards that they are. Wonder Heaven was smart to shoot down Sarah. I don't know how they did it, but they're lucky. Mama or Papa would have cleaned this mess up an hour ago. His eyes turned back down to Grace. sure the point is we're probably the strongest people around right now. Sobering as that thought is. So what's your professional assessment, Captain? His words implied a promotion from the former rank Eden had given her. It was the first test to see how she might respond to further probing into the issue of Fate's former tormentor.
Would have gone to you first, but it seems like you were still patching yourself up. Eden, Fate's words hit Grace as if they were pressing on a tender bruise. A compliment from his voice. Even if he had no grand plan on using her, Fate definitely wanted to manipulate her by pouring honey into her ears. No, it's just a fucking positive comment, an observation. Calm down, Grace. After all, he only looks and sounds like him, but he isn't him. Grace looked to Fate. Yeah, last fight took more out of me than I was expecting. I got arrogant and got hurt. Won't let it happen again. Yeah, right. Were you kidding, Grace? Everyone knows you're upset. You made it fucking clear. They're seeing how you're letting your emotions affect your work. Prove you still have some value. Fate is saying something about Isamu. Grace doesn't quite catch it, but he's probably not too into the kid trying to burn down the city. Good for nothing Brad always was a problem. So many people are getting hurt because of him. But that's right. She's not different. Fate also said something about Seraph getting shot down. And that maybe the virtues could have helped more. Maybe they would have. But Caitlin said that this was for the good of everyone. Omelets and shit like that. Mama and Papa, huh? He talks about them like a kid. Fuck. He still misses his parents. That's my fault. And what's that? Captain? What a joke. I'm not a leader. I'm barely a soldier. Eden made me his lieutenant, but that wasn't even real. How could I be a captain? Reese escaped her mind and thought for a moment. She steeled herself yet again and spoke with intent. Of course. Survey the surrounding area first. We need to ensure a safe path down the subway. If we get into too many fights, we may not have the strength to be any help to the virtues. We're supposed to be assisting. I'll do what I can to protect the cadre and assist in whatever you need. Sir. Grace had hoped that final sir would include Fate, not even, in her decline of promotion to captain. After all, that title belonged to a leader, not a murderer. Not someone who stared at the child of those she's coldly taken from this world. Couldn't even apologize. First order of business.
Fate raised an eyebrow slightly as Grace made clear she had no intention of taking a higher role. He thought to offer her a chance to be self-assertive, to seek to make her own choices without needing to be told what to do. However, it seemed that time wasn't here yet, though Fate held out hope that it would be soon. His face relaxed as she asked the first order of business. Well, first, I wanted you to survey the area around here. You probably got the best eyes and sense for it. When we head out of here, just in case Jake can't guide us, it'd be, nice to have a more practical route ready. He looked at her as he continued. His tone was a bit lighter, though that had more to do with the change in topic away from strategy. You don't gotta call me sir. Not really your superior or above you anyway. The captain bit earlier was just because it kind of seemed right. Particularly in combat scenarios, you usually have a pretty good sense for things. But you might make a good leader. At least for fighting. If nothing else. Of course, if you hate that idea, forget I said anything. Just don't want you to, feel like you gotta follow anyone's orders. Especially mine. Fate's eyes turned downwards towards the ground, and his fist clenched slightly. No, I know I still probably sound like it. that it was always commanding people around. I have no intention of being like that. Whatever we do or agree to for what who should be in charge or making calls, we should agree on it together. We maybe don't really even need a leader. I think we can all work together without one. Though, like I said, if we did have one, I'm not opposed to you taking the reins.
What an idiot. Of course we need a leader. Provides structure in a combat scenario and ensures we don't devolve into chaos. At least he knew that. Me? No, I couldn't. I'm not a leader. And never have been. My job is to be the rook. Deadly and fast in the right situation. An important piece that ensures we're all well protected but can still inflict damage. Grace's expression becomes more stern. Is she getting angry? No, that can't be. Why? That's it. It's because of his voice. He talks so much. Kind of like how Eden did. Always talking about what's right and what to do next. Suggestions on making things better. He doesn't realize that both he and Eden are just natural leaders. Charismatic men that everyone likes. The kind of person Grace hated. But after getting to know Eden, she couldn't help her fall for it. Fate isn't any different. Having a leader is important. You're really charismatic and can think on your feet. I really can't think of a better fit. As for me, I can't lead. The other cadre members don't respect me enough, and I don't feel that I can make good decisions for a group. You are the best choice. Don't apologize for making the offer. I understand what you're trying to say. I just don't agree. But if it makes you feel better, I'll drop the sir. Eat it. Fate. Apologies. You still look like him. You're such a fucking idiot, Grace.
There's a slight tensing of Fate's muscles at the usage of Eden's name. It was hard to hear, but not entirely unexpected. You're fine. I figured it might take a bit. Trailed off slightly, finding it difficult to look at Grace for a moment before returning his gaze to her. And I get what you mean. For whatever it's worth, I do think you'd make a fine leader at some point, but I get that now may not be the time. Well, I guess I can continue to try and lead you guys, and who knows? Maybe it'll be better having someone who leads from the front this time. Tension left his body from the misnomer, and it all had since passed. An easy smile once again on his face. That's for the sir thing. I mean, I'll leave that up to you. Like you said, command structures exist for a reason, or whatever. It feels right to you, and it feels right. No issue on my part, so long as you don't feel obligated. He stood up to face her now. Eden may have said lot of lies and made false promises, but some of it was emulated off of me. I mean, the true stuff. Even if it just was my, at the time, hopeless dreams while I was trapped in there watching you guys. The desire for a better CAIN and a better world, for you to end up okay at the end of this, and for you to get out. Just because that monster spoke it from my mouth doesn't mean it wasn't real. Not that bad, anyway. If there's anything left of the city, we still gotta go out to eat sometime. I'm pretty sure we still gotta have group movie night of aliens, right? Even if his lies can go to hell. You're still the same friend that I want to check on every now and again once you've made it out. He doesn't get to take that away from me. Not after using my body and thoughts. But for all that, we gotta save Manhattan. If we can. Considering you've turned down the promotion, and I'm stepping back into the old role. Fate extends his fist partly towards her for a fist bump. Rather dorky behavior, but Fate didn't seem the biggest on formality when it could be avoided, especially with his friends. Gonna need my lieutenant watching my back, if you'll accept it. I think you're the only person I could ask to be my number 2 on the team.
Grace felt bad about a lot, especially right now, and especially involving Fate. He didn't know that she hurt him, and yet he was so kind and supportive. He was patient and understanding. Grace hated that. She hoped he would yell at her and berate her for being the worst person he'd ever laid eyes on. It only felt just for that to be the case. Yet, she was being complimented and reassured. Considers me a friend. She thought that she and Eden's date hadn't meant anything. But if he were there, then maybe they could get along. However, this wasn't the time to get sentimental and close. Grace still couldn't trust him. She couldn't get attached so quickly again. But a meal in the movie would be nice. And maybe he can hold up on Eden's offer of visiting her, and I was getting ahead of myself. What? A fist bump? What a dork. We'll need to stick together for now. Building trust would be good. Scared as I am, I want someone to trust. Just be careful this time, Grace. Grace accepted Fate's invitation and bumped her fist on his. Her expression became softer than her usual stern look. Grace's eyes were still cold in their natural way, but pain still showed. Was she really going to put her trust in Fate? As long as the thread is thin, maybe they could work together. Grace's face became stern again, and showed a small addition of determination to her expression. Understood, Fate. I'll be your sword. Let's do what we need to.
Hyperion had consigned himself to solitude, though even in the depths of his self-loathing, he wished to make himself useful. As such, the Lich King in Hunter Spirit form was out and about, patrolling the warehouse perimeter. He had heard the entire conversation that had transpired between Fate and Grace Harper. He shouldn't have bothered, but his curiosity had gotten the better of his good judgment. And now he paid the price. Hyperion could feel his body shaking in anger, even as it was insensate as he piloted the Lich King. Anger not toward either of the conversation's participants, but rather himself. How foolish he had been to think that Grace Harper could come to care for the wretch that he was. Of course she would rather be silent than even bother interacting with him. He was a pathetic urchin, groveling even as he had outstretched his hand to her. He was and would forever be unworthy of companionship. As his consciousness exited the Lich King's form, Hyperion found that his face was wet. Had he been crying? Words could not describe the fury he felt towards himself as he wiped his face. No, he would conquer this world. This is what he wanted. This is what he wanted. He did not wish for friends, he wished for empire. But would empire fill the void he felt in his heart? No! But perhaps on his path to it, he could divest himself from his heart, bury his pain where no one, least of all him, could find it. For good. And that brings us to the end of this sort of podcast thing that we decided to have between sessions 13 and 14. If you made it through, thank you for listening. Be sure to stay tuned for Monday's upload of session 14 as we continue our way through the solstice, and we'll see where these three characters and everyone else goes from here. Until then,
Indeed.
we'll see you all under heaven. Bye-bye.
Remy.